The blizzard that buried Lily Kearney's family came without warning on February 3, 1879, turning their homestead cabin outside Denver into a tomb of ice and snow while she was 3 miles away delivering eggs to the neighboring ranch. She returned to find the drifts piled 15 feet high against the walls, the chimney buried, and when the men from town finally helped her dig through days later, she discovered her parents and 2 younger brothers frozen in their beds, the fire long extinguished, their faces peaceful as if they had simply drifted into an eternal sleep. At 19 years old, Lily found herself completely alone in a world that suddenly seemed impossibly vast and cold. The funeral was brief. The ground was too frozen to dig proper graves, so they had to wait for the thaw, keeping the bodies in the church basement. Lily stood beside 4 pine coffins in her threadbare black dress, listening to Reverend William speak words that meant nothing while the February wind howled outside. Neighbors she barely knew pressed her hands and murmured condolences, but their eyes held a different message. A young woman alone was a burden, a problem to be solved. Mrs. Henderson suggested she might find work as a laundress. Mr. Briggs mentioned his brother in Kansas City needed a governess. Old Tom Fletcher, 60 if he was a day, actually proposed marriage right there in the churchyard, his tobacco-stained teeth showing in what he must have thought was a kindly smile. Lily sold everything. The homestead, the chickens, the plow horse, her mother's wedding ring. It brought $300, which she sewed into the lining of her traveling bag along with the small silver locket containing a curl of her mother's hair. She could not stay in Colorado where every snowflake that fell would remind her of that terrible day, where every corner held ghosts. She needed warmth, needed to feel the sun on her face, needed to go somewhere winter could not follow her with such devastating cruelty. The train took her south through Kansas and into New Mexico territory, then west into Arizona. She watched the landscape transform outside the window, the snow giving way to brown earth, then to desert sand and towering saguaro cacti standing like sentinels under an endless blue sky. The warmth that seeped through the train car windows felt like absolution, like permission to keep breathing. When the conductor called out Florence, Arizona, something in her chest loosened slightly. This was far enough. This was warm enough. This was where she would start again. Florence sat along the Gila River, a town of adobe buildings and false-fronted wooden stores that had sprung up to serve the nearby Silver King mine. The main street was unpaved, lined with establishments bearing hand-painted signs advertising everything from dry goods to whiskey. Chinese laundries stood beside Mexican cantinas. Cowboys on horseback moved past freight wagons hauling ore. It was rougher than Denver, Wilder, but the February sun beat down with an intensity that seemed impossible after months of Colorado winter, and Lily felt something in her frozen heart begin to crack. She took a room at Mrs. Chen's boarding house, a surprisingly clean establishment run by a Chinese woman whose husband had died building the railroad. The room was small but had a window overlooking the street and cost only $3 a week including breakfast. Mrs. Chen spoke broken English but had kind eyes, and she did not ask too many questions when Lily signed the register with shaking hands. The first week passed in a haze. Lily walked the streets of Florence trying to find her footing in this new world. She inquired about work at the general store, the hotel, the restaurant. Most places took one look at her pale skin, her city dress, her obvious gentility, and shook their heads. A few men made offers, but the gleam in their eyes made clear they were not offering respectable employment. She began to understand how precarious her situation was. The money sewn into her bag would not last forever. Florence was not Denver. There were no charity organizations, no church societies for destitute young women. This was a mining town where people came to strike it rich or die trying, where survival went to the strong and the cunning. On the 8th day, she met Isaac Morgan. She had been walking past the livery stable, her shoes dusty from the unpaved streets, when a horse reared up inside, squealing in panic. A man shouted, and there was a tremendous crash. Lily stopped, uncertain, as several men ran toward the commotion. Curiosity pulled her closer, and she peered through the stable doors to see a massive bay stallion bucking violently in one of the stalls, eyes rolling white with terror. 3 men were trying to get a rope on him, but the horse was having none of it. "He is going to hurt himself," Lily said, though no one was listening to her. Then another man appeared, moving with a calm deliberation that contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. He was tall and lean, dressed in dusty work clothes and a battered hat, his face shadowed. He held up one hand and the other men fell back. Then he approached the stall empty-handed, speaking in a low voice Lily could not quite hear. The horse screamed and kicked at the wall, but the man did not flinch. He kept talking, kept moving slowly forward until he was close enough to touch the horse's neck. His hand moved in slow circles, and gradually, impossibly, the horse began to calm. Lily watched, transfixed, as the wild creature lowered its head and blew out a long breath, the violence draining from its body. The man continued stroking its neck, murmuring words, until the horse was standing quietly, sides heaving but still. The other men stared in amazement. "I will be damned," one of them said. "Isaac, you got a gift." The man called Isaac turned then, and Lily caught her first clear look at his face. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair curling over his collar, sun-bronzed skin, and startling blue-gray eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His face was handsome in a weathered way, marked by sun and wind and hard living. But it was those eyes that caught her, intelligent and guarded, holding depths she could not fathom. His gaze swept past her, then returned, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the dusty stable floor. Something passed between them, quick as lightning, gone before she could name it. Then someone spoke to him and he turned away, and the moment broke. Lily walked back to the boarding house with her heart beating strangely fast, telling herself it meant nothing. She had simply been startled by the horse, affected by the drama. But that night, as she lay in her narrow bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Florence, it was those blue-gray eyes she saw when she closed her own. She learned about Isaac Morgan in pieces over the next few days, the way one learned everything in a small town, through overheard conversations and casual gossip. He was a cowboy who worked various ranches in the area, taking whatever jobs came his way. Breaking horses, mending fences, moving cattle. He had no fixed place, no family anyone knew of. He had been in Florence for about 2 years but kept to himself mostly. Some said he was running from something back east. Others claimed he had Indian blood, though no one could say which tribe. The saloon girls liked him because he was polite and paid his debts. The ranchers trusted him because he worked hard and knew horses better than any man in the territory. But no one really knew him. Lily told herself she was not interested in learning more. She had more pressing concerns, like the fact that her money was dwindling and she still had no employment. Mrs. Chen had been kind enough to extend her credit, but that could not last forever. She needed work, and she needed it soon. The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen had a friend, a Mexican woman named Rosa who ran a small cafe near the edge of town. Rosa's daughter had just married and moved to Tucson, leaving her short-handed. She needed someone who could cook and serve, someone who did not mind long hours and hard work. The pay was not much, but it included lunch and dinner, which would save money. Lily accepted immediately. The work was harder than anything she had done before. Her mother had taught her to cook, but never for crowds of hungry miners and cowboys who wanted their food hot and plentiful and fast. Her feet ached from standing all day on the hard floor. Her hands grew rough from washing dishes in scalding water, but Rosa was patient and fair, and Lily learned quickly. Within a week, she could flip pancakes without thinking, could carry 4 plates at once, could judge at a glance whether the beans needed more seasoning or the coffee more water. The men who came to Rosa's cafe were mostly respectful, cowed perhaps by Rosa's fierce protectiveness of her new waitress. A few tried their luck with flirtation, but Lily had perfected a polite coolness that discouraged familiarity. She took their orders, brought their food, collected their payment, and kept her thoughts to herself. She was surviving, which was all she could manage right now. The grief over her family still came in waves, especially at night when she had no work to distract her. She would lie in bed and remember her brother's laughter, her father's steady presence, her mother's gentle voice, and the pain would be so intense she could barely breathe. But during the day she worked, and working meant she could not think, and not thinking meant she could endure. Isaac Morgan came into the cafe on a Tuesday morning in early March. Lily looked up from pouring coffee and found him standing just inside the door, hat in his hands, those blue-gray eyes scanning the room before settling on her. Her heart did something complicated in her chest. "Sit anywhere," she said, proud that her voice came out steady. He chose a table near the window and sat with his back to the wall, the habit of a man used to watching his surroundings. Lily brought him coffee and took his order, bacon and eggs and biscuits, the same thing most men ordered. He had a low voice, soft-spoken, with an accent she could not quite place, something southern but faded. "Thank you, miss," he said, and the courtesy in his tone surprised her. She brought his food and he ate methodically, not rushing but not dawdling either. She tried not to watch him, but her eyes kept drifting to his table. There was something about him that drew attention, a self-contained quality, as if he was complete unto himself and needed nothing from anyone. It fascinated her, that aloneness, because it mirrored her own. When he finished, he left payment on the table with an extra nickel, more than the meal cost. Lily picked up the coins, still warm from his pocket, and told herself not to be foolish. He came back the next day and the day after that. Always in the morning, always ordering the same thing. He did not try to make conversation beyond polite greetings, but Lily began to feel his presence like a physical thing, an awareness that prickled across her skin whenever he was near. She caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unreadable, and she wondered what he saw when he looked at her. On the 5th morning, as she refilled his coffee, he finally spoke beyond the necessary pleasantries. "You are new to Florence," he said. It was not quite a question. "I came last month," Lily replied carefully, the coffee pot heavy in her hand. "From where?" "Colorado." He nodded slowly as if this confirmed something. "That is a long way." "Yes. Do you like it here?" "Arizona." Lily considered the question. "It is warm," she said finally. "That is what I needed." Something flickered in his eyes, understanding perhaps, or recognition. He did not press for more, and she was grateful. She moved away to serve other customers, but she could feel him thinking, could sense questions forming that he was too polite or too reserved to ask. The weather turned hot as March progressed, the desert sun beating down with an intensity that made Colorado seem like a distant dream. Lily grew tan despite her bonnet, her arms browning from the sun that streamed through the cafe windows. She learned to love the heat, the way it sank into her bones and drove out the chill that had lived there since February. At night, she would stand outside the boarding house and look up at stars so bright and numerous they seemed impossible, and she would breathe in air that smelled of sage and dust and promise. Isaac continued to come to the cafe most mornings. They began to exchange a few more words each day, building a conversation in small increments. He asked about her work, whether Rosa was treating her fairly. She asked about his, learning that he was currently working at the Double C Ranch west of town, breaking a string of Mustangs brought in from the desert. He spoke about horses with a passion that animated his usually reserved face, describing their personalities as if they were people, each one unique and deserving of respect. "Most men try to break their spirit," he said one morning, staring into his coffee as if seeing something beyond it. "But that is wrong. A horse without spirit is just a machine. The trick is to earn their trust, to convince them that working with you is better than fighting you. Is that what you did with that bay stallion at the livery?" He looked up, surprised she remembered. "You saw that?" "I was walking past. It was frightening how wild he was." "He was frightened, not wild. There is a difference. Someone had hurt him badly. You could see it in his eyes, the expectation of pain. I just had to show him that not everyone was going to hurt him." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them acknowledged. Lily thought about trust and pain, and the difficulty of believing that not all experiences would end in loss. She thought Isaac might understand that better than most. "Did it work?" she asked. "Is he better now, getting there? These things take time. You cannot rush healing." She nodded, and their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the cafe seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of them suspended in a moment of perfect understanding. Then Rosa called her name and the spell broke, but something had shifted, some wall had cracked. After that, their morning conversations grew longer. Isaac began to arrive earlier before the breakfast rush, when Lily had time to sit for a moment with her own cup of coffee. They talked about small things, safe things. The weather, the town gossip, the silver mine's latest strike. But beneath the surface ran a deeper current, an increasing awareness of each other that made every casual word feel weighted with significance. Lily found herself thinking about him at odd moments during the day. The way his hands looked holding his coffee cup, scarred and calloused from hard work but graceful too. The way he listened when she spoke, with complete attention, as if her words mattered. The rare times he smiled, how it transformed his serious face into something breathtaking. She had not thought about a man this way since before the blizzard, had not imagined she would ever have space in her grief-filled heart for something as frivolous as attraction. But Isaac was slipping past her defenses without even trying, simply by being himself, solid and steady and unexpectedly kind. She did not know if he felt the same pull. He was always respectful, always careful not to cross any lines. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch, something hungry and yearning quickly hidden behind his usual reserve. She wanted to ask, wanted to know if she was imagining this thing building between them, but she was afraid of the answer either way. April arrived with winds that blew dust through every crack and crevice, coating everything in fine grit. Business at the cafe slowed as people stayed indoors when they could. Lily found herself with more free time, which meant more time to think, and thinking inevitably led to remembering. 4 months since the blizzard. 4 months since she had become an orphan. Sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. Sometimes it felt like yesterday. She was washing dishes one slow afternoon when Rosa came into the kitchen looking worried. "Lily, Mija, I need to tell you something." Lily dried her hands, her stomach tightening at Rosa's tone. "What is wrong, my son in Prescott. He is sick, very sick. I need to go to him to help his wife with the children. I will be gone maybe 2 weeks, maybe more. Of course you must go. I can manage the cafe. Rosa shook her head. No, Mija. I have to close it. I cannot leave you here alone. It would not be safe. A woman alone, the men would think they could take advantage. I am sorry, but you will have no work while I am gone. Lily's mind raced, calculating her remaining money against 2 weeks without wages or meals. It would be tight, very tight, but she forced a smile. Do not worry about me. Your son needs you. Go be with your family. Rosa left the next morning on the stage to Prescott, pressing $2 into Lily's hand despite her protests. You are a good girl, she said, hugging Lily tightly. I will be back as soon as I can. The cafe closed, and Lily found herself adrift. She had grown used to the rhythm of work, the way it structured her days and tired her body so she could sleep at night. Without it, the hours stretched empty and dangerous, leaving too much room for memory and sorrow. She walked the streets of Florence trying to find temporary work, but there was nothing. She sat in her room at the boarding house and tried to make her money stretch, eating as little as possible, avoiding any unnecessary expense. On the third day, Isaac found her sitting on the bench outside the boarding house in the late afternoon, watching the street with listless eyes. He dismounted from his horse and approached with his hat in his hands, concern written across his face. Rosa's cafe is closed, he said without preamble. Where have you been eating? Lily lifted her chin, pride making her spine straight. I am fine. That is not an answer. I have food in my room. His eyes searched her face, taking in details she did not want him to see. The hollows under her cheekbones, perhaps, or the way her dress hung a bit looser than before. Lily. The sound of her name in his voice did something to her, cracked something open. Tears stung her eyes and she looked away quickly, furious at her own weakness. I am fine, she repeated, but her voice shook. Isaac stood there for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. Come with me. What? Please, just come with me. I want to show you something. She should have refused. She barely knew this man, and it was improper to go anywhere with him unchaperoned. But something in his face convinced her, some honest concern that felt like the first genuine human connection she had experienced since her family died. She stood, and he led his horse with one hand while they walked through town. He brought her to a small adobe house near the river, more of a cottage really, with a wooden porch and a mesquite tree providing shade. This is where I am staying, he explained. The owner is in California for 6 months, so I am keeping an eye on the place. Come inside. The interior was spare but clean, containing little more than a table, 2 chairs, a stove, and a bed in the corner. But there was a realness to it, a sense of it being lived in, that appealed to her. Isaac went to the stove and began building a fire with practiced efficiency. What are you doing? Lily asked, making dinner. Sit down. Isaac, I cannot. This is not proper. He turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was unlike anything she had seen there before, open and almost vulnerable. Lily, I have watched you grow thinner every day this week. I know Rosa is gone and the cafe is closed. I know you have no family here, no one to help you. Please, let me do this one thing. Let me feed you. We can leave the door open if you are worried about propriety. His honesty disarmed her completely. She sank into one of the chairs, too tired to maintain her pride any longer. Thank you, she whispered. He cooked with the same methodical competence he brought to everything, producing a simple meal of beans and salt pork and cornbread that tasted like the finest restaurant fare to her empty stomach. They ate in silence at first, but it was a comfortable silence, peaceful. The open door let in the evening breeze, carrying the sound of the river and the scent of blooming desert flowers. How did you know? Lily asked finally. That I needed help, Isaac set down his fork, choosing his words carefully. I know what it is like to be alone, to have no one. I have been living that way for a long time. I saw it in you from the first day you served me coffee, that same aloneness. I thought maybe you would understand me the way most people do not. Understand what? What it is like to be the only person you can count on. To wake up every day and have to fight just to keep going. Lily's throat tightened. My family died in February. A blizzard in Colorado. I came home and found them all frozen. I could not stay there anymore, could not stand another winter. So I came here to the warmth, hoping I could outrun the grief. She had not meant to say so much, but the words poured out, needing to be said, needing to be heard. Isaac reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against her skin. I am sorry. That is a terrible thing to survive. What about you? Where is your family? His face closed slightly, pain flickering in his eyes. Gone in different ways. My mother died when I was 12. My father drank himself to death 2 years later. I have been on my own since I was 14, just drifting from place to place, taking whatever work I could find. I never stayed anywhere long enough to call it home. That must be lonely. It is. But it is safer too. You cannot lose what you do not have. They looked at each other across the table. Two solitary souls who had found each other by accident in this dusty Arizona town. And Lily felt something shift in her chest, something that had been frozen since February beginning to thaw. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Thank you for telling me, she said softly. And for this meal, it helps more than you know. Come back tomorrow, I will make breakfast. Isaac, I cannot accept charity. It is not charity, it is friendship. Please, Lily, let someone help you. You have been carrying everything alone for too long. She wanted to refuse, to maintain her independence, but the warmth in his eyes melted her resistance. All right, she agreed. Tomorrow. She came back the next morning and the morning after that. Each time Isaac cooked for her. Simple meals but generous, and they talked. Really talked, the way she had not talked to anyone since her family died. She told him about her childhood in Denver, her father's work as a carpenter, her mother's beautiful singing voice. She told him about her brothers, Tommy, who was 12 and wanted to be a doctor, and Sam, who was only 8 and loved horses. She cried when she talked about them, and Isaac let her cry, offering quiet comfort through his presence and understanding. He told her about his travels through Texas and New Mexico, the ranches where he had worked, the people he had known. He told her about learning to read at 15 from a schoolteacher's widow who had taken pity on him. He told her about a horse he had owned once, a dapple gray mare he had loved more than anything, who had broken her leg in a prairie dog hole and had to be shot. His voice went rough when he spoke of it, and Lily understood that the loss of that horse had cut him as deeply as the loss of his parents. They were both damaged people, she realized, scarred by loss and loneliness, trying to make their way in an unforgiving world. But together, sharing meals and stories and silences, they seemed to hurt a little less. The sharp edges of grief softened when Isaac was near. His presence made the world feel less impossibly large and empty. On the 5th day of Rosa's absence, Isaac asked if she would like to go for a ride. He had borrowed a gentle mare from the Double C Ranch, a sweet-tempered sorrel with a white blaze. Lily had not ridden in months, but the prospect of getting out of town, of seeing something beyond Florence's dusty streets, was irresistible. They rode west along the river, following a trail that wound through mesquite and palavered trees. The desert was in bloom, covered in wildflowers that turned the sandy earth purple and gold. Lily tilted her face up to the sun, feeling its warmth sink into her bones, and for the first time since the blizzard, she felt something approaching peace. Isaac pointed out landmarks and wildlife, showing her the desert through his eyes. He explained how to tell which plants had water, which tracks belonged to javelina or coyote, which hawks were hunting overhead. He spoke of the land with reverence, and Lily understood that for him, this vast open country was a kind of sanctuary, a place where a lonely man could find solace. They stopped beside the river where cottonwoods provided shade, and Isaac spread a blanket on the ground. He had brought bread and cheese and apples, and they sat eating while the river murmured past and birds sang in the branches above. It felt like being in another world, far removed from death and loss and struggle. "I love it here," Lily said, watching sunlight sparkle on the water. "Thank you for bringing me. I wanted you to see it. I thought it might help, seeing beautiful things again." She turned to look at him, this unexpected man who had appeared in her life and changed everything. "You have helped me more than you know, Isaac. These past few days you have given me something I thought I had lost forever." "What is that?" "Hope. The feeling that maybe I can survive this, that maybe life will not always hurt this much." He moved closer, his eyes intense. "You will survive. You are stronger than you think." "How do you know?" "Because you are still here. Because you got on a train alone and traveled 1,000 miles to start over. Because you work hard and do not complain and face every day with courage even though your heart is breaking. That is strength, Lily. Real strength." No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such conviction and admiration. The look in his eyes made her feel seen in a way she had never experienced. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He went very still, barely breathing. "Isaac," she whispered, not sure what she was asking. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. "I should not. This is not proper. You are alone here, vulnerable. I do not want to take advantage." "You are not taking advantage. I am choosing this. I am choosing you." He made a sound low in his throat, something between a groan and a sigh, and then he was kissing her, his lips gentle at first, tentative, as if giving her time to pull away. But Lily did not pull away. She leaned into him, her hands sliding into his hair, kissing him back with all the loneliness and longing and desperate need she had been carrying for months. His arms came around her, strong and sure, pulling her close, and she felt safe for the first time since the blizzard, protected and wanted and real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since the first time I saw you," he admitted, his voice rough. "Why did you wait so long?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid of feeling this much, of needing someone again. I have spent years teaching myself not to need anyone, and then you appeared and undid all of it in a matter of weeks." Lily's heart swelled so full it ached. "I am afraid too. I lost everyone I loved. I do not know if I can survive losing someone again." "Then we will have to take care of each other. We will have to be brave together." She kissed him again, softer this time, sealing the promise. Whatever was growing between them was fragile and new, but it was real, more real than anything she had felt in months. For the first time since February, the future seemed like something other than an endless gray landscape of endurance. With Isaac beside her, it seemed like something that might contain joy. They rode back to Florence as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and crimson. Isaac helped her down from the horse outside the boarding house, his hands lingering at her waist, reluctant to let her go. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she promised. She went inside feeling as if she were floating, her lips still tingling from his kisses, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Mrs. Chen gave her a knowing look but said nothing, only smiled and went back to her cooking. Lily climbed the stairs to her room and stood at the window watching Isaac ride away, already counting the hours until she would see him again. The next days passed in a haze of happiness she had not thought possible. Isaac finished his work at the Double C Ranch and took a job at the livery stable, which kept him in town. Every spare moment they spent together, walking by the river, sharing meals, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He kissed her in the shade of cottonwood trees, held her hand when he thought no one was looking, told her stories that made her laugh until her sides ached. With him, the weight of grief that had been crushing her began to lift, not disappearing but becoming manageable, something she could carry without breaking. Rosa returned after 12 days, her son on the mend, and the cafe reopened. Lily went back to work with a lightness in her step that had not been there before. Rosa took one look at her glowing face and raised an eyebrow. "So," she said in her accented English. "Something happened while I was gone." Lily blushed. "I do not know what you mean." "That cowboy, the quiet one with the sad eyes. He has sad eyes no more, and neither do you. This is good, Mija. Everyone deserves to be happy." Isaac continued to come to the cafe for breakfast, but now when their hands touched as she poured his coffee, it was deliberate, a secret connection that sent warmth spreading through her body. When he looked at her, his eyes held promises that made her blush. The other customers began to notice, making good-natured jokes about the cowboy who was sweet on the waitress, but neither Lily nor Isaac minded. They were beyond hiding what they felt. In May, Isaac took her to a dance at the community hall. It was the first social event Lily had attended since coming to Florence, and she was nervous, conscious of her shabby dress and worn shoes. But Isaac looked at her as if she were wearing silk and diamonds, and when he led her onto the dance floor, she forgot to be self-conscious. They danced to fiddle music while the whole town watched, and Lily rested her head against his shoulder and thought that this, right here, was worth surviving for. Afterward, he walked her back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. They stopped in the shadows of the porch, and Isaac took both her hands in his. "Lily, I need to tell you something." His serious tone made her nervous. "What is it?" "I have been offered a job. A good job as foreman at a ranch near Tucson. It is steady work, good pay, a place to settle. But it would mean leaving Florence, and I will not go if it means leaving you." Her heart clenched. "Isaac, that is a wonderful opportunity. You should take it. Not without you." He squeezed her hands, his eyes searching her face. "Come with me, marry me. I know we have not known each other long, but I love you, Lily. I think I have loved you since that first morning when you poured my coffee and looked at me like I was worth seeing. You make me want things I thought I would never have. A home, a family, a future. Say yes, please say yes." Tears streamed down Lily's face, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet, and kissed her so thoroughly that Mrs. Chen had to clear her throat from the doorway to remind them where they were. They broke apart laughing, giddy with happiness and plans and possibilities. They married 2 weeks later in the small church at the edge of town, with Rosa and Mrs. Chen as witnesses and half of Florence in attendance, because everyone loved a wedding. Lily wore a simple cream-colored dress that Rosa had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Isaac had picked that morning. Isaac wore his best shirt and a new bandana, and when he said his vows, his voice was steady and sure, full of conviction. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and Isaac kissed her, Lily felt a completeness she had not known since before the blizzard, as if all the broken pieces of her were finally knitting back together. They spent their wedding night in Isaac's adobe cottage by the river. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of the room. The laughter faded as they looked at each other, suddenly shy despite all their earlier kisses and declarations. "I have never," Lily started, then stopped, blushing furiously. Isaac cupped her face in his hands. "Neither have I. We will figure it out together. There is no rush. We have the rest of our lives." He kissed her slowly, tenderly, and Lily felt the last of her fear dissolve. This man had saved her when she thought she could not be saved. He had shown her that life after devastating loss was not just possible, but could be beautiful. She trusted him with her body as she trusted him with her heart, completely and without reservation. They came together with a sweetness that brought tears to Lily's eyes, two lonely people finding solace and joy in each other. Isaac was gentle and attentive, more concerned with her comfort than his own pleasure, and when they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, Lily felt a peace so profound it was almost frightening. She had not thought she would ever feel this safe again, this cherished. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Isaac's arms tightened around her. "I love you too, more than I ever thought I could love anything." They left for Tucson 3 days later, their belongings packed into a wagon borrowed from the livery stable. Rosa and Mrs. Chen and half the town came to see them off, pressing food and small gifts into their hands, making them promise to write. Lily looked back at Florence as they rolled away, this town that had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go, and felt gratitude instead of sorrow. Florence had given her Isaac, had given her a second chance at life. The ranch near Tucson was called the Lazy M, 5,000 acres of desert grassland running up against the Santa Catalina Mountains. The owner, a gruff man named Marcus Daniels, took one look at Isaac and nodded approval. "You come recommended," he said. "They say you know horses and men and how to get work done without drama. I need a foreman who can run this place while I deal with buyers and suppliers. Think you can handle it?" "Yes, sir," Isaac said confidently. "And this is your wife." Marcus turned to Lily, his expression softening slightly. "There's a house goes with the job. Not fancy, but it's sound. We have a good well, and my wife will be glad of another woman around." The foreman's house was a 2-room adobe structure with a covered porch and a view of the mountains that took Lily's breath away. It was small but solidly built, with glass windows and a good stove and a real bed frame instead of just a mattress on the floor. To Lily, who had been living in a single rented room for months, it was a palace. "It is perfect," she breathed, turning in a slow circle in the main room. Isaac came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on top of her head. "This is our home, our real home. We can stay here as long as we want, put down roots, build a life. Does that sound good to you?" "It sounds like everything I ever wanted." They settled into ranch life with surprising ease. Isaac took to his role as foreman naturally, commanding respect from the cowboys through his knowledge and fairness rather than bluster. He rose before dawn and often did not return until after dark, but he always came home to Lily, always greeted her with a kiss and a smile that said she was the best part of his day. Lily made their small house into a home, sewing curtains and planting a garden and learning to cook the things Isaac liked best. She befriended Marcus's wife, Catherine, a kind woman who taught her about desert gardening and preserving food and all the skills needed to thrive in this harsh land. The grief over her family was still there, a permanent ache in her heart, but it no longer consumed her. She could think about her parents and brothers now and smile at the memories instead of drowning in sorrow. She knew they would have loved Isaac, would have been happy that she had found someone to share her life with. On particularly hard days, when the anniversary of the blizzard approached or when she saw a family with young sons and felt the stab of loss, Isaac would hold her while she cried and remind her that grief and love could exist together, that honoring the dead did not mean forgetting how to live. Summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work and quiet happiness. Autumn brought cooler temperatures and the fall roundup when Isaac was away for days at a time moving cattle. Lily missed him terribly but was proud of him too, watching him lead the men with confidence and skill. When he returned, dusty and exhausted, she would draw him a bath and wash his hair and hold him close, grateful for his safe return. Winter came, and Lily braced herself for the fear and memories it would bring. But Arizona winter was nothing like Colorado winter. The days were cool but sunny, the nights cold but not brutal. When the first rain fell in January, she stood on the porch with Isaac and watched it darken the earth, breathing in the smell of creosote and wet desert, and realized that she had survived. A year ago her world had ended, and now here she was, alive and married and home. The winter had stolen her family, but it had also, in a way, given her Isaac, because without that tragedy she never would have come to Arizona, never would have walked into Rosa's cafe and served coffee to a quiet cowboy with sad eyes. "What are you thinking about?" Isaac asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About how strange life is, how the worst thing that ever happened to me led to the best thing. I think about that too. About how I was drifting through life half dead until you appeared and reminded me what it felt like to be fully alive." She turned in his arms to face him. "I want to have a baby with you. I want us to be a family." Isaac's face transformed, joy and wonder and a little fear chasing across his features. "Are you sure? It is dangerous and I could not bear to lose you. I am sure. I want to create something new, something that is ours. Life from love, not death from cold. Do you understand?" "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I understand." By early spring, Lily's suspicion became certainty. She was pregnant, her body changing in small but unmistakable ways. When she told Isaac, he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with delight, then immediately set her down and apologized, worried he had been too rough. His concern and excitement were both endearing and exasperating, but Lily loved him all the more for it. Catherine helped her through the strange symptoms and discomforts of pregnancy, sharing wisdom from her own 3 successful births. Marcus increased Isaac's wages without being asked, understanding that a growing family needed security. The Cowboys, tough men who had seen everything, became absurdly protective of Lily, rushing to carry anything heavy, scolding her when she worked too long in the garden. It was overwhelming and sweet in equal measure. Summer heat made the pregnancy more difficult, but Lily persevered, determined to see it through. She sewed tiny clothes and prepared the second room as a nursery. Isaac built a cradle from mesquite wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk, carving a pattern of horses running along the headboard. They lay in bed at night with his hand on her swelling belly, feeling the baby kick, marveling at the miracle of it. In late September, on a day when the heat finally broke and the air smelled of coming rain, Lily went into labor. Catherine sent one of the cowboys for the midwife while she stayed with Lily, coaching her through the contractions. Isaac paced outside like a caged animal, driving the men crazy with his nervousness until Marcus finally told him to go check the north fence line, anything to get him out of the way. But Isaac could not stay away. He was back within an hour, arriving just as the baby crowned. Catherine took one look at his pale, determined face and let him in. He knelt beside the bed and held Lily's hand while she pushed, whispering encouragement and love. And when the baby finally emerged, wailing lustily, he wept openly with joy and relief. "A son," the midwife announced, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Lily's chest. "A big, healthy boy." Lily stared down at the baby in wonder, this perfect tiny human she and Isaac had created together. He had Isaac's dark hair and her nose, and his eyes, though infant blue now, would change to some color that would be uniquely his own. She felt a rush of love so intense it was almost frightening, a fierce protective instinct she had not known she possessed. "Hello, Samuel," she whispered, naming him for her youngest brother. "Welcome to the world." Isaac touched the baby's head with shaking fingers, his expression awed. "He is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." "Believe it. This is our family now. This is our life." They named him Samuel Thomas Morgan, honoring both of Lily's brothers, and he became the center of their world. Lily had been afraid that having a baby would bring back the grief too intensely, would make her dwell on what her family had lost, but instead it felt healing, as if she was carrying forward their legacy in this new life. When Samuel smiled, she saw echoes of her brother Sam's mischievous grin. When he grabbed her finger with surprising strength, she remembered Tommy's determined nature. Her family was not truly gone as long as she remembered them, as long as she told their stories to her son. Isaac was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby despite his size and strength. He sang to Samuel in a soft baritone, old cowboy songs and lullabies he must have learned somewhere in his wandering years. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor during sleepless nights so Lily could rest. Watching him cradle their son, Lily fell in love with him all over again, deeper than before. The months passed in the exhausting, joyful blur of new parenthood. Samuel grew sturdy and strong, quick to smile, fascinated by everything around him. By his first birthday he was walking, tottering around the house on unsteady legs, getting into everything. The cowboys spoiled him shamelessly, carving him wooden horses and teaching him to make silly faces. Marcus and Catherine treated him like an extra grandchild, their own children long grown and gone. Life settled into a rhythm that felt permanent and good. Isaac continued to work as foreman, earning Marcus's complete trust and respect. Lily tended the house and garden and their son, finding fulfillment in the daily tasks of creating a home. They made love in the quiet hours after Samuel fell asleep, their passion deepened by affection and partnership and shared purpose. They talked about the future, about maybe having more children, about saving money to eventually buy their own small ranch, about growing old together on this land they both loved. On the second anniversary of the blizzard, Lily woke before dawn and slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Isaac or Samuel. She walked out into the desert as the sun rose, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She thought about her parents and brothers, about the family she had lost and the family she had gained. She cried for what was gone but smiled through her tears for what remained. "I am happy," she said aloud to the empty desert, to her family's spirits if they were listening. "I survived, just like you would have wanted. I found love. I have a home. I am going to be all right." The morning breeze stirred her hair, warm and gentle, and Lily chose to believe it was their answer, their blessing. She walked back to the house as Isaac was waking, and he pulled her into his arms without a word, understanding where she had been and why. They stood together on the porch watching the sun climb higher, while inside Samuel began to babble in his crib, calling for his parents. "Thank you," Lily said quietly. "For what? For saving me. For being my home when I had nowhere else to go." Isaac kissed her temple. "You saved me right back. We saved each other. That is what love does." Years passed, good years full of hard work and simple pleasures. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic child with his father's way with horses and his mother's quick mind. When he was 4, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, who had her father's blue-gray eyes and a stubborn streak a mile wide. 2 years after that came another son, John, who was quiet and thoughtful and loved to follow his father everywhere. Isaac and Lily saved their money carefully, planning for the future. When Samuel was 8, Marcus offered to sell them 200 acres on the western edge of the Lazy M, good land with water access and room to build. They bought it with the savings they had accumulated and spent a year building their own ranch house, larger than the foreman's cottage, with 3 bedrooms and a real parlor and a porch that ran the length of the front. The Cowboys helped with the construction, and it became a community project, everyone contributing time and skills. The day they moved into the new house, Lily stood in the middle of the empty parlor and felt her heart overflow. This was theirs, truly theirs, built with their own hands and paid for with their own work. Isaac came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, just as he had in their first home, and she leaned back against him with perfect trust. "We did it," she said. "We built this life from nothing." "You were never nothing," Isaac corrected. "You were everything from the moment I met you. This life, this family, this home, it was all waiting inside us. We just had to have the courage to reach for it." They called their small ranch the Rising Sun, because every morning Lily watched the sun rise over the mountains and felt grateful to be alive to see it. They ran cattle and horses, not many, but enough to make a decent living. Isaac's reputation for training horses brought buyers from as far as Tucson and Phoenix, willing to pay good money for mounts that were well-mannered and reliable. Lily kept the books and managed the household, raised the children, planted gardens that flourished despite the desert climate. Samuel grew tall and lanky, turning into a capable ranch hand who could rope a steer by the time he was 12. Margaret was fearless, insisting on learning to break horses alongside her father, refusing to be limited by her gender. John had a gift for numbers and wanted to study engineering, dreaming of building bridges and railroads. Lily and Isaac encouraged all their ambitions, determined that their children would have opportunities neither of them had known. The grief over Lily's first family never entirely disappeared, but it transformed over the years into something gentler, a bittersweet ache rather than a sharp pain. She told her children stories about their grandparents and uncles, keeping those memories alive. On February 3rd each year, the anniversary of the blizzard, the whole family would spend the evening looking at the few photographs Lily had saved, talking about the people they depicted. It was important to her that her children knew where they came from, understood that love persisted even beyond death. Isaac never forgot his own lonely past either. He went out of his way to help drifters and young cowboys who reminded him of his younger self, offering work and advice, and sometimes just a meal and a kind word. More than one young man who came to the Rising Sun down on his luck left months later with money saved, new skills learned, and a restored sense of hope. Lily would watch Isaac talk to these lost boys with patience and understanding, and love him all the more for his generosity of spirit. Time moved forward as it always does, bringing changes both welcome and difficult. Marcus Daniels died when Samuel was 15, and Catherine followed 2 years later, leaving the Lazy M to a nephew who had no interest in ranching and sold it to a corporation from back east. The new owners brought in their own foreman and crew, changing the character of the place. But by then, Isaac and Lily's ranch was well established and thriving, so the changes to the Lazy M did not hurt them much beyond nostalgia for earlier days. The children grew up and made their own paths. Samuel married a sweet girl from Florence and took over more of the ranch operations as Isaac's knees began to ache and his back grew stiff from years of hard work. Margaret shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, traveling to California for training, and then returning to open a school in Florence for ranch children, who otherwise would have had no education. John earned a scholarship to study engineering in San Francisco, writing long letters home about the wonders of the city and the bridges he would someday build. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Isaac took Lily back to the spot by the river where they had first kissed. The cottonwoods were taller now, the river a bit lower after years of drought, but the place still held its magic. They spread a blanket on the ground just as they had decades earlier, and ate the same simple meal of bread and cheese and apples. 20 years, Lily marveled, looking at Isaac's face, lined now with wrinkles earned from squinting into the sun and smiling at his family. His hair was shot through with silver, and his hands were gnarled from arthritis, but to her he was as handsome as the day they married. It feels like no time at all and a whole lifetime at once. Best 20 years of my life, Isaac said. Every day with you has been a gift I did not think I deserved. You deserve everything good, Isaac Morgan. You are the best man I have ever known. He kissed her then, and it was sweet and familiar and still held the spark that had drawn them together 2 decades earlier. They lay back on the blanket and looked up through the cottonwood branches at the impossibly blue Arizona sky, holding hands like young lovers, while the river murmured its eternal song. "You ever regret it?" Isaac asked. "Leaving Colorado, coming here, taking a chance on a lonely cowboy you barely knew." Lily turned her head to look at him. "Not for a single second. You gave me a reason to survive, Isaac. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. How could I ever regret that? I was so afraid when I first realized I was falling in love with you. Afraid of losing you, afraid of not being enough, afraid I would ruin everything by caring too much. But you were braver than I was. You chose me even when it was scary, even when you had every reason to protect your heart. We chose each other. That is what makes it perfect." They stayed by the river until sunset, talking and laughing and remembering, then rode home slowly through the gathering dusk. The house they had built together glowed with lamplight, and Samuel's wife was there preparing dinner, and everything was exactly as it should be. More years passed, bringing the joys and sorrows common to all lives. Grandchildren arrived, lively additions who filled the house with noise and laughter. Lily taught them to cook and garden, told them stories about their great-grandparents lost in a Colorado blizzard, about how their grandfather had been the kindest man in Arizona. Isaac taught them to ride and rope, to treat animals with respect, to work hard and keep their word. The children adored them both, seeing them as constants in a changing world. They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by 3 generations of family. Everyone gathered at the rising sun for a party that lasted all day. There were races and games, music and dancing, too much food and enough laughter to last a lifetime. Lily watched Isaac play with his grandchildren, his face alight with joy, and felt complete satisfaction. This was what they had built together from loss and loneliness. This abundance of love, this legacy of family, this proof that happiness could grow from the ashes of devastation. As the years advanced, their bodies began to slow, but their love remained constant. They still held hands walking to the barn in the morning. They still sat together on the porch each evening watching the sun set over the mountains. They still shared a bed and whispered secrets in the dark, their passion gentled by age but no less real for its transformation. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered again, now including great-grandchildren, an enormous brood that amazed Lily every time she counted them. 40 years since that day in Florence's little church when she had promised to love Isaac forever. And she had kept that promise through easy times and hard, through prosperity and struggle, through everything life had thrown at them. Isaac gave her a gift he had worked on in secret, a wooden box he had carved with intricate designs, horses running along the sides, the sun rising over mountains on the lid. Inside, carefully preserved, were the first coffee cups she had ever served him from, somehow retrieved from Rosa's cafe decades ago, and a dried wildflower from the bouquet she had carried at their wedding. "I have been collecting pieces of our story," he said quietly, his voice grown rough with age, "so we would never forget how we began." Lily wept, clutching the box to her chest, overcome by the thoughtfulness of the gift and the depth of love it represented. "As if I could ever forget." "You are written on every corner of my heart, Isaac Morgan." They kissed while their family cheered, and if the kiss was softer and slower than those in their youth, it was no less meaningful. They had earned this love through 4 decades of choosing each other every single day. Eventually, as happens to all people, their time began to wind down. Isaac's arthritis worsened until he could no longer ride or do heavy work. Lily's eyes grew dim and her hands shook with palsy. But they faced aging together with the same courage they had faced everything else, helping each other through the difficult days, celebrating the good ones. Samuel ran the ranch now, with his own sons working alongside him, but Isaac and Lily remained in the house they had built, determined to live out their days on the land they loved. On a warm afternoon in late October, when Lily was 71 and Isaac 78, they sat together on the porch as they had thousands of times before. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting the desert in gold and amber. Isaac held Lily's hand, his grip still strong despite the tremors. "I have had a good life," he said, his voice contemplative. "Better than I ever dreamed possible when I was a boy alone in the world. You gave me that, Lily. You made me believe I deserved love and family and happiness." "We gave it to each other," Lily corrected, as she always did. "I would have died from grief if you had not found me, Isaac. You were my home when winter stole everything else. And you were mine. You still are. You always will be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the light change, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch, the distant voices of grandchildren playing, the horses moving in the corrals, the wind in the mesquite trees. Lily felt a profound sense of peace, of completion. She had survived the unsurvivable, had built a life more beautiful than anything she could have imagined in those dark days after the blizzard. Winter had stolen her family, but from that loss had grown this abundance. A lonely cowboy had become her home, and together they had created something that would outlast them both. "I love you," she said, squeezing his hand. "I love you too," Isaac replied. "Forever." The sun touched the mountains, and the sky blazed with color, and Lily and Isaac Morgan sat together watching it, content in the knowledge that their love story had been written exactly as it was meant to be. From that first cup of coffee in a dusty Arizona cafe to this perfect moment, surrounded by family and love and the warm desert air that had healed Lily's frozen heart so many years ago. Whatever came next, they had this, the life they had built together from grief and loneliness, the love that had saved them both. Years more they lived on the rising sun, growing frailer but never losing the essential connection that bound them. Isaac's health declined gradually, his strong body finally betraying him after 8 decades of hard use. Lily nursed him tenderly, as he had once cared for her when she was broken by grief. She read to him from the books he loved, held his hand through pain, made sure he was never alone or afraid. When Isaac finally passed, quietly in his sleep at age 83, Lily felt the loss like a physical wound. But she did not break as she had broken when her first family died. She grieved deeply but without despair, because Isaac had taught her that love persisted beyond death, that the years they had shared could never be taken away. His body was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a cottonwood tree he had planted himself. And Lily visited the grave daily, talking to him as she had in life, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch, about how much she missed him but how grateful she was for every moment they had shared. She lived 3 more years, cared for lovingly by Samuel and his family, surrounded by the legacy she and Isaac had created. She spent her final days in the house they had built, in the bed they had shared for more than half a century, looking out the window at the mountains she had come to love almost as much as she had loved her husband. On a spring morning when the desert was in bloom and the air smelled of creosote and possibility, Lily Kearney Morgan passed peacefully at 74, her hand held by Samuel, her face peaceful and content. They buried her beside Isaac under the cottonwood, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. The family gathered after the funeral, 3 generations strong, filling the house with life and laughter despite their grief. They told stories about Lily and Isaac, about how they had met and fallen in love, about the life they had built from tragedy and loneliness. The grandchildren spoke of Isaac's gentle wisdom and Lily's fierce strength. The great-grandchildren, too young to fully understand death, played in the yard where their great-grandparents had once played with their own children. Samuel stood on the porch as the sun set, watching his family, and understood that this was his parents' true legacy, not the ranch or the house or the land, but this abundance of love, this proof that from the coldest winter could spring the warmest summer, that a lonely cowboy and a grief-stricken girl could create something beautiful and lasting that would ripple forward through time.